Welcome to this week's version of Culture Couch Live, and two familiar faces, Emil and Carly. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, Ruthie. How are you?
And we've got a guest, which we love having guests on. And Em, I'm going to hand over to you. You can introduce one of your, dare I say, favourite clients.
Favorites, definite. Yeah,
I'll hand over to you, Em, for the introduction.
So everyone, welcome to the Culture Couch Live. The wonderful Lorraine Gray, a wonderful leader, inspiring leader at Hydro One. I've had the pleasure to work with Loz, as she's affectionately known now, due to our nicknaming, for about 7 odd years now, I think. First working with a team in a different area of the business, and because of Lorraine's consistent performance but probably more her leadership development skills, she's worked her way up the organisation to a point where over the last 2 years we've been able to work in a significant segment of the organisation and go on a really big culture change journey together with PBD, and it's been wonderful. We've got to see a lot of Ontario, meet a lot of great people, but more so I've really loved the journey of watching Lorraine grow and really trailblaze this work inside of a larger organisation, which is really the point of today's conversation. So welcome to the Culture Couch Live, Loz.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great.
Excellent. Well, Loz, we cover a lot of topics on this thing, but I think one of the things that we spoke about before we got on, and we had a question about this last year, was how do you have an impact exponentially within your company, when you start a system like this? So maybe if you could talk to that and your experience around that, and where it sort of started in this smallest little pod and where it's got to, and how you're all able to do that.
Sure. So I think that's a loaded question. So
yeah, like that first one.
Yeah, we'll break it up. But it's important to give some context just in terms of what you said, how it got started. Yeah. And I was introduced to Emil and Performance by Design through my boss at the time, and he brought Emil and team in and getting an opportunity to see the system and how it works. And so seeing it on that smaller scale made it possible that as I progressed through the organization to consider, okay, how do we then expand that? Because I was, clearly bought in and sold on it. And so that was what Emil and I did each time, was try to figure out, okay, now how do we make this effective, intuitive?
What on that is, because you're right, it is the system, and once people see it, what was the thing that after the initial workshop? It's a question without notice. I haven't even asked Em this. What was the thing that really grabbed you about the system and about the PBD system that you then thought, wow, this is actually pretty cool. Now I know what it's like. I can do this, this, and this. What was there? One or two things that really grabbed you with it?
Yeah. I'm a Brene Brown fan.
Yeah.
And not to say that like the system is like, something Brene made, but more that I love psychological safety.
Yeah.
And immediately it became clear that this was a way to deliberately create or foster psychological safety.
Yeah, that's true. I remember the first day we worked together up in on Bay Street there, and it was interesting because it was a group of project managers who quite literally work on projects alone. So technically they were a team, but almost siloed individuals inside the context of a so-called team. And we had that moment around 11 a.m. where we had to put the line in the sand and say, are we a team? And we got challenged, I remember, by a team member there, Loz, who, we basically stopped the workshop and said, should we continue after lunch? And we had a chat, and we said, the question I asked the team was, can we help each other be better individual players? And the team sort of said, well, yeah, I think we can. I said, well, I think it's worth us continuing. Let's go for another 3 hours. And then by the end of the day, that particular team member sort of got up and went, yeah, that was good. It was a real sort of cool little moment. But I think that day that was a bit of a signal to Lorraine and the team that you can always help your teammates get better by having open, honest conversations and practicing real talk, irrespective of the role you play and the position you have on the team. Did that come up for you, Loz? Is that what you're sort of touching on a bit?
What came up for me at the time, and so I don't remember it quite the way you do, doesn't mean that it's not like that. You know, what stood out for me, so I played basketball when I was in high school. And I played basketball in the States. And I remember the feeling of operating on a team and what that feels like. And so, and first of all, Emil is an excellent facilitator and really great at drawing out what the room is thinking or feeling and using that as part of, of how we progress together. But I was really struck by the concept of the sports world and applying those teamwork philosophies. And they were very intuitive because I've lived it, what that feels like when you're in the middle of a play where you don't say anything, but you already know what that person next to you is going to do and where they're going to be and how they're going to get there and what the part you're going to play. So regardless of this being a group of individuals, I knew that we could work more effectively and cohesively. So Emil did a great job of bringing them together.
Yeah,
and Carly, that's not unique, is it? I mean, really, I don't know how many times we do that in a workshop, but particularly when you get an exec team together, it because we tend to think about our job singularly, isn't it? I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job, which technically is correct. But unless we bring in that team concept, but I would say, Carly, geez, maybe 50% of the time we ask that same question, don't we?
Yeah, even more probably. But I really like the way you articulated that, Lorraine. Like, I know where my team's going to be and I know what their next move's potentially going to be. And I don't think we've thought about it like that before, Ruzi, but that's actually a really, really good way to think about how you come together as a group. But yeah, I would say, particularly in really big organizations, and Lorraine, I know your organization is huge, when you're part of a lot of different teams, so you might be part of the exec team and you're part of your team and you feed into another team, and we say to the group, this needs to be your main team, this needs to be the team that you think about most and that you kind of are responsible to. And when you're part of 3 or 4 teams, that's actually a really hard conversation, Emil, because it's not just that team, it's the wider organization as well. But my question to you, Lorraine, is more around the cultural pillars that are really important to you. And when you're implementing this work, what's the one really important thing that you think every team needs to be amazing?
Yeah, so let me 2 things. Like, first of all, I actually think once you learn about teamwork, it's actually not that hard to be a part of multiple teams.
Yeah, right.
Because really, if in an organization, there shouldn't be teams that are deliberately at odds with each other.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you should all be moving towards a common goal. And so it should become easier once you learn, like, oh, I'm not in conflict with these other individuals. We're actually on the same team.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate that? So then, what really stands out for me or stood out for me is the real talk. And what I love about the real talk is that it comes from a place of care. It's a really different way, which is sort of laughable, of thinking about feedback. Because, we're all taught like the STAR method of feedback or this method of feedback and the sandwich method, the Oreo method, the whatever. But all of those things, in my opinion, completely miss the point.
Yeah.
Feedback should come from a place of, I want you to be successful. I want us to be successful. And I'm not giving that feedback because I need to give you feedback.
Yeah.
I'm giving that feedback because I care about you. I care about our success. And therefore, we need to have this conversation. And what's also really cool is the emphasis on, more often than not, I'm telling you what's going well.
Yeah.
And I think
Good.
it's quite amazing, isn't it, coming from a team background that I do. The way, if you reframe it, Lorraine, you're right. And I got some brutal feedback. So I didn't have a coach that framed it like that. But
Yeah.
I actually knew why he was giving it, because
Right.
in a team environment, there's one objective to win. So even though he didn't pull me aside and say, "Oh, Ruzi, yeah, I care about you," I knew he did because of the environment that we're in. But I think when you frame it like that,
Yeah.
it's amazing. In all our workshops, I think that's a really key point for them, because I think you can sort of see them sitting there and, yeah, why don't I give feedback? And not a feedback session, but then it's reframed like that.
Yeah.
It just makes sense, doesn't it? And it should never. But we say this a lot. It's not a feedback competition. So at the end of the week on Friday afternoon, we don't hand back. Right, yeah, here was our feedback. Emil, you've given 23 pieces of feedback. Carly, you're 22. Lorraine, you're 21. And the winner for the week. It's about who's improved, isn't it? That's the basis of it.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
100%.
I'm gonna ask you a question as a neighbour. So I'm gonna go back to that thread of. So I'm got a house next door. I could see a lot of renovations and a lot of work going on. What was the thing when the neighbours were poking their head over the fence, going, "What's Lorraine doing?"
Yes, great question.
Hang on, something. I'm not sure what's happening over there.
Yeah.
But
That's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, that's the essence of culture. I talk about it all the time. Culture travels. I'm the neighbour looking at, gee, there's a lot of workers in there. I don't know what's going on. What do you think was happening that they were seeing, that they were poking their nose over the fence and going, we want some of that?
Yeah. Emil, do you want to start?
So one thing we did really well is we did the core work. We went all over every single zone within Lorraine's organization, her whole line of business, and we worked with every leader. I traveled north and south and east and west, and actually mum and dad were here during that time. So that was a pretty funny experience. But we listened to all the teams and we captured all this data around who we are and what we stand for with our values and behaviors. And then we took about 6 months to refine it down to a really clear culture code with, teamwork and pride, everything wrapped around teamwork and pride. That was the essence of all the values with 8 keystone behaviors. And the thing, because Hydro itself is an organization that fundamentally is looking for errors and variances and things that aren't working so that things do work, i.e. electricity, there was a habit in the organization where we looked at what was not working and we constantly shared that. And we constantly talked about that. Right. So the only thing that we really focused on outside of all the work we were doing was, let's just get into the habit of when we start a meeting, we're going to catch the good.
Right.
And that was it. One behavior, start your meeting with a win and a shout out, and let's just hold the line on that. And then that'll give us the space and time to go get the data and refine, practice the real talk. But let's not expect anything but wins and shout-outs to start meetings.
Yeah.
Then that evolved into, right, well, hang on, these stories are starting to travel. Hang on, did you hear about this group over in... Yeah, that's interesting. And so that the story started to grab a hold of. So then with that space, we said, right, this catch the good thing's got something. Let's build a catch the good flywheel. So now the wins and shout outs get shared from the ground level up to their supervisor, shared to their manager, to the superintendent, up into Lorraine's monthly meeting. And then Lorraine now shoots a catch the good video that gets released to the whole of her line of business every month and is shared in relevant meetings so that everyone watches the 5-minute catch the good video. And that's what I think. They're talking about things that are working. I want a bit of that. And that's what I think has been
interesting, though, isn't it, Lorraine? It's often simply, we talk about a lot, Carly, it's a conversation. Words are really powerful, aren't they? Like, people listen to leaders all the time. What is Lorraine? Gee, did you hear what Lorraine said? What did Lorraine's team say? So do you find that?
It's kind of interesting because some of it is sort of through osmosis.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Where, I've I've done a lot of work in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And part of that work is trepidation by people in general to be supportive, because it's a big change and we're used to thinking of the world a certain way. And what you observe, like any other change management sort of initiative or opportunity, is that eventually people start to buy in.
Yeah.
And they buy in a way that made sense all along to them.
Yeah.
And so that's not wrong. That's just how it works in terms of when a new idea, a concept is new, but it makes sense and you're trying to get used to it. And it's a different way of thinking. So, that's my observation, is that it's, both trying to implement something that is different.
Yeah.
It's not how we're used to doing things today, but as Emil and Performance by Design say, more goes right than goes wrong.
Yep.
And so how do you harness that? And then people, grab onto it and say, I really like that. How do I do that more deliberately? And, my message has been, I got a guy.
No, but it sounds, Lorraine, like really it has been, the sentiment has turned from let's start with the negative to let's start with the positive, and just use that positive language, use that positive sentiment, use that to motivate the team and to get them thinking in more of a positive way. So what have you seen as a result of that positive sentiment? Like, what are some of the changes that you've seen since the team have had that opportunity to look at things more positively?
Yeah, I've actually seen them talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with one of our supervisors, and I had met with the team a team that day, and we were debriefing later. And, he actually hadn't participated in the workshops just because of the timing that he had moved into this role. And he said to me, I really like this idea of catching the good, but I want to do it like when I'm out there in the field talking to people. And so I said, that's great, but, can I ask you a question? When let's pretend we're on a team, hockey, football, doesn't matter, and we haven't practiced the play, then how are we going to do the play if we haven't done it in practice? And so we do it deliberately in terms of what Emil described, which is in the kickstarts. We catch the good in the beginning of our day of once a week because it's deliberate. Yeah. And I watched the light bulb go off of like, yes, you have to practice a skill so that you do it in real time. Perfect. And so that's what we did. And it's become more intuitive to approach it that way.
Yeah. I think that deliberate's a good term, isn't it? Like, it's funny you talk about sport. I mean, everything we do in a footy club that I've been with is deliberate. Like nothing, like you don't turn up any day and go, gee,
we'll figure it out as we go along.
Who's around today? I wonder what I've got to, and it's a really good point because we have to be deliberate. But the other thing, Lorraine, I want to ask you about, because I'm a pretty simple guy and I can't speak for Emil or Carly, but I know I'm pretty simple. But the simpler, the better. And I think that's what I'm really proud about our product, because it's not rocket science. It's simple and people can understand it and execute it. I think when it becomes too complicated, that's when people walk out of the room and go, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know whether I can do that. Just talk to the simplicity of the system.
Yeah, I think that's when it, there are so many sayings that I now say. But definitely is not rocket science. And yes. So people latch on to my, when Emil would travel the province and go and speak to some of the teams, like at the end of the day, they're like, this makes sense and just hope it lasts.
Yeah.
Because it's not, and it is fundamental. It is simple, but it's still practice.
Yeah.
because we've been taught to do leadership a certain way. We've been taught to do teamwork a certain way. We've been taught to have difficult conversations. And so we're pivoting that. I love things like player coach syndrome, and talking about, okay, does a coach get on the court and take the ball? Is that what a coach does? And then when you position it that way, there was like, oh, no, they don't. Great. So how are we going to make sure we don't do that? And so I think it is simple, but it does take some practice to change that thinking.
Yeah, and that's the deliberate part, isn't it? I guess that's the point I was trying to make. It's the system has to be, you have to gravitate to the system because of the system, but then it has to be deliberate, doesn't it? And Carly, there's no it's not rocket science, to Lorraine's point.
Yeah.
But the companies that do best are deliberate, aren't they? They form systems, they regularly review, and they regularly look at their own systems.
Yep, absolutely. Because the systems are, and we say it all the time with James Clear, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your system. So if you don't have the systems in place, it doesn't work. And I think back to the original point you made, Lorraine, around trusting the process.
Yeah.
That is wins and a shout out to the beginning of the meeting. Sometimes feels awkward. Sometimes people don't understand what it's like, but it's a simple thing that we just do over and over. And that's how we become high performing, because it's those 1%ers that happen all the time. So yeah, it's so exciting to hear, Lorraine, and it's really, really good work from you to push it through your teams.
Well, it was really, I just want to tell you a quick story, because it was really interesting, because I was in a meeting where normally opportunities are brought up, and as they should be, that's the context of the meeting. And all of a sudden, this has never happened. But sorry, this is not a small meeting. Like, this is a big meeting with lots of people on the call. And somebody during the call, having done this work, or I don't know, through osmosis, but there was a relationship to the work for sure, gave a shout out as opposed to a question.
Yeah.
And shouted out, like they said, I'd like to give a shout out. And so we
Yeah, great.
You're like a proud parent when things like that happen. You're like, yes, they did it.
Yeah.
So, Em, I'm going to ask you a question, because I can sense, first time I've ever met Lorraine, but I sense she's very, very humble. So I'm not going to ask her this question. I'm going to ask you the question. What makes Lorraine a great leader, Em? You work with a lot of leaders. What makes Lorraine a great? We've talked a lot about the system, but often the system, as we know, is dictated by the leader. The leader has to drive the system, allow the system, et cetera, et cetera. So, and Lorraine, feel free, if Em gets this question wrong, feel free to jump in. But Em, what makes Lorraine a great leader?
What sprung to mind is so I haven't used this metaphor very often, Lorraine, but it's the performance pendulum. It's the balance between care and support, the sort of green energy that we talk about, and the balance between the red energy, the accountability and standards. And like any pendulum, a pendulum doesn't just sit there. It's constantly going one way or the other. And sometimes you've got to access your red energy to drive standards and say it how it is. And sometimes you've got to wrap your arms around them and hug them off the ground because a mistake's been made, or they need that caring support. I think Lorraine manages that pendulum beautifully, knows when to push, knows when to pull. And that's again, it's a skill. It's something that you practice, and sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you push when they needed a hug, and sometimes you hug when they needed a push, But on the flip side of that, one thing I really rate about you, Loz, is Loz will call up and just go, hey, this just happened.
Yeah.
Here's what I experienced. Can you tell me what you reckon? She's constantly looking and asking for feedback. So it's not just the ability to, but the reason why she can balance that is because she then asks, hey, did I push too hard there? And I'd be like, yeah, a little bit, but then it sort of came. And so we review. So she's got really well into the pattern of reviewing the play, just like we do in sport. Look at the tape. Okay, we should have had our foot there, should have pushed a bit there. So there's that balance part, but then the constant, hey, what are you seeing that I might not be seeing? So ask for help, requests feedback, and then lives the work. So
Yeah, but that's what you're saying is that she's very self-aware, Emil.
yeah, well, we've done a lot of work on the colours as well. And the rain leads with a high red and yellow, but definitely accesses her green energy when required, which is the art and skill of leadership. So that's where that's how I see it.
What do you write a reply, Loz? You want to get a little to finish off? What do you think of that assessment of you? Are you happy with that, or do you want to maybe give him a call after this Culture Couch live?
Damn it, Emil. First of all, it's I don't disagree. As Emil was talking, I was thinking about how, one of the things that I like to say is psychological safety without accountability is a country club.
Yeah.
And accountability without psychological safety is a punitive culture.
Yeah.
Psychological safety plus accountability is performance.
Yeah.
And I'm not perfect. It's important to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And for sure he's right. I've definitely been like, oh my God, Emil,
Yeah.
this just happened.
Yeah.
Like, or I have to have this conversation. Am I doing this right?
Practice a lot. We rehearse a lot. We rehearse for real talks. I always ask the other, what might he or she be thinking? So we're constantly using the real talk, the structures of our work to rehearse and practice. And very, what we say, if you're emotional and we're flying off the handle, go reach out to a mate, get yourself in order, practice the conversation, then have it when you're calm, considered and professional. And Loz does that. You do that beautifully, Loz. And I learned so much from the process of coaching you and being that confidant for you. So my thanks is to you for being so coachable and helping me learn as a coach and facilitator.
I mean, I think the last Culture Couch or the one before we did on coaching, like execs getting coaching. And I think we talked about it. And like you mentioned it, sport, everyone gets coached. Even individual athletes going to the highest level get. So that's an awesome way to finish, guys. I mean, we could keep going for another half an hour, but
I think so. Is there anything to close off on, Loz? I felt like there might be one last little thing there that you wanted to share.
I was going to say that my job at the end of a real talk is to say thank you. So, thank you.
Very good. Excellent.
Great episode.
It's been an awesome chat. And again, it's just every time we do this, Carly, isn't it? The themes are so consistent, so I hope those leaders out there that think, I'm not going to change, you're going to have to at some point, because if you don't change to be that empathetic, I like to talk about psychological safety, accountable. If you don't change, someone behind you is coming up. Someone's going to take your job. All right, let's be perfectly frank. So it's your choice. Life is. I'm going to preach here, guys. Life is a choice. As a leader, you can keep doing what you're doing, or you can decide to change and become a leader in 2023, which is all about psychological safety, accountability, shared values and systems, and systemizing, those sort of things. So once again, another guest who's saying exactly what we preach. And amazing conversation, Loz. That was awesome, and great relationship. We really value that relationship too. It's been a really good journey, and obviously plenty of more real talk to go.
That's for sure.
And what they're going to say? What they're going to say after the real talk? Thank you. So for everyone listening to the Culture Couch Live, thank you. That's a good way to finish. No, thanks, guys. Awesome.
Thanks, Carly. Good on you, Loz.
Thank you.
See you later.
All right, we'll see you all next week on the Culture Couch Live. Thanks very much.